At long last, ladies and gentlemen, season 5 of Chewing the Gristle is indeed upon us. A convivial conversation fest between myself, Gregory S. Koch, Esquire, and a variety of musical potentates from hither and yon. Brought to you by our friends at Wildwood Guitars and our friends at Fishman Transducers, of course, both of which I've had long-standing and continuing relationships with, and I'm very grateful for their continued support in this endeavor to bring you Chewing the Doggone Gristle. We've got a bunch of fun guests, some you have heard of, some maybe not so much. It'll be a little bit of discovery and a little bit of chaos, all rolled into one. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Now, without any further ado, let's chew some gristle. This week on Chewing the Gristle, we have, hailing from beautiful Brooklyn, New York, Jeff McErlain, blues rock guitar player extraordinaire. He's out there playing that blues rock guitar like a fiend in heat. You've seen him on stage with Robin Ford. You've seen his many instructional things on the internet, on his own website, on YouTube, on TrueFire. He's a madman. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff McErlain, this week on Chewing the Gristle. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we convene once again around the gristle fire. I don't even know what that is, but listen, we're chewing the gristle with Jeff McErlain. He's out there in beautiful Brooklyn, New York, guitar player extraordinaire, educator extraordinaire, cool cat, mutual friends of a lot of mutual friends of a lot of mutual friends. I'm putting an extra syllable in there for some reason, but it feels good. Jeff, how the hell are you? What's happening?
Doing damn fine, man. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, too. Now, what's going out there on this beautiful, what's going on out there? It's beautiful here in Wisconsin. What's it like there?
It is beautiful in Brooklyn, and it is 76 degrees and sunny. So I'm all,
Perfect.
What am I doing inside talking to you?
Wow, exactly. Because we're creatures of the permanite.
It's kind of funny.
You know, this is only an audio thing because we don't, one of these days I'll actually get do the thing where we do it on YouTube as well. But you've got quite a buffet of delicious guitars behind you. And
as do you.
That's true. I do actually, don't I?
Yeah, I was just kind of commenting. We're both wearing black T-shirts and black hats. And
well, you know what? I have found that the black T-shirt is an excellent way to disguise the bullum, if you will, the abdominal goiter, which seems to fluctuate in size depending on how much road food I'm imbibing in.
I find that like when you do a lot of YouTube videos, people don't ever comment because black T-shirt's kind of like the uniform.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're thinking about different shirts. I'm like, oh, wait, I wore that one last video. So people are going to be like, why is he always wearing that blue shirt? You know?
Exactly.
It's a funny thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, you do a ton of online stuff. Tell the folks what your main things that you do online and where they can digest it.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, the main thing is jmguitarlessons.com, and that's my teaching site. Where at this moment, I'm going to get into a subscription soon or later. I have a kind of an inner circle because you cannot touch my inner circle. I know you know that reference, right? Yeah. Nobody else does, you know. So where I do the teaching, got a lot of courses there, and then I have my YouTube page, and that's the main thing right now. But I got a tour coming up next month, in September in Europe. So playing.
We're going to be over there too. Maybe we'll cross paths on the great European excursion. Oh, you froze for a minute.
So where was I?
You were talking about, we were talking about Europe and that you're going over there and that we're going to be there as well. And hopefully our paths will cross. Where are you all going to be?
When are you going to be there? I'm going to be primarily in the Czech Republic, which is interesting. So I didn't really realize we're spending almost 3 weeks in the Czech Republic. So it's
nice. Well, that'll be fun.
Yeah. We did a few years ago. It's been great. It's a lot of the audiences are great. And it's fun to get over there. And you're kind of going all over the place there, right?
Correct. We fly into Frankfurt and then we're just north of Hamburg initially. And then we go over to Berlin and then we're just, I've had the same agent, the mighty Klaus Schmidt, who I affectionately call the Great German Beast. And for reasons that are, perfect. Anyway, but he he's really good at finding something for like every day of the week. So when we go over there, we don't have many days off, which is a good thing. So we're not hemorrhaging money in some hotel someplace. But by the same token, sometimes we are crisscrossing old Deutschland like it's going out of style. But we have 5 days in France this time, which is good because I'm sure you're aware when you go over there, it's like you'll have agents in certain regions, but not agents in other places. And it's hard to break into various different places depending on, your connects. So this time we're finally going into France. We've only done, during the Fender days, I do stuff in France all over the place. But with the band, we've only really done like northern France. We go into Nancy and we do something there at a music school up there, and we do a show and a workshop-y type of thing. But this is actually a full 5 days of workshops in the afternoon, gigs in the night.
Wow!
And so that should be good. And then after we
get grueling,
we're in Austria a little bit, and then we end up at the Mannheim Guitar Summit. So we're doing that at the very end of the month, and then we head to the UK for about 10 days and do stuff there. So I'm just working out all the details. You know how it is. Like, what guitar should I bring? Maybe I can get guitars sent over there and do some kind of a thing at the end where we give them away through a magazine or something. Or who am I going to send merch to? Because if you bring all your merch over, your stuff weighs a ton, and just that usual stuff.
It's funny. I used to tour a lot more in the 1000s.
Right.
And what happened, I had a kid, as you do, and
yes,
I just I remember coming home off the road once, and my wife despised me, and my son was, older suddenly, and I was like, I didn't come home with like enough money to go, I'm going to keep on doing this,
right.
And so what's been great now is my son's 18, he starts college in like a week, so as he's gotten older,
I know what that's like.
Oh yeah, well I'll find out. So he's So I've been sticking the toe back in doing some touring again, because I had missed that angle of it. And I did some touring with Rob, and that kind of got me back into it, and the kick that I needed to get into it. But I'm looking forward to this. But yeah, like we had a few dates in Austria, and they got canceled because the booking agent obviously had some personal stuff go on.
Yeah,
that we just found out. Then all the dates in Austria just got canceled because this guy's whole life disintegrated.
Right.
And then so you're like, oh. Okay, so we picked them up. We got a good booking agent in the Czech Republic, so we just grabbed some more in the Czech Republic. So we're playing every night, which is, as you know, it's got its great things as a player. It's awesome,
right?
Yeah,
exactly.
It
has its moments, but I find that as long as you keep moving, it's okay. It's when you stop for 2 days, then you're like, and then it just hits that second day.
Yeah.
Your body just says, remember that thing where you went like nonstop? Well, here's a reminder that there are limitations to the request you make of your body.
But I'm doing a whole juggling of gear like you do. Like, what am I going to use over there? What guitar? How do I get that there? How much merch? All that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just part of the thing. And then, of course, you get there, and then it's without a doubt, people are like, oh, it's so loud. And you're going, who did you book in here? Why is this a thing?
Parallel existence, man. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Go ahead. I want to hear what
I even contemplated bringing like a Fractal, and I love the Fractal stuff. I think it's great. I use it all the time for courses. It just makes life easier. I live in Brooklyn. I can't crank stuff.
Sure.
I could, but my neighbors would not like me.
Right.
So I try to be a civilized human being, you know what I mean? And also who wants to turn up, we can talk about those things you're talking about there behind me. If you see my YouTube channel, you see all this stuff usually, like yourself. So I don't have that option. So I thought about it and I'm like, oh, fuck that. Bring in an amp again, because that's what it's all about. The amp is part of the instrument for guys like us. Like you're just,
totally.
And the Fractal we're playing improvisatory music.
Right.
And so that is such a huge factor. Like, okay, if we were playing in a cover band and it's, it's the same thing every night. Yeah, Fractal, killer. Right. I know there are great players who use it, but I didn't grow up that way. And so you want to be able to go over the amp and go, whoa, and get that thing. And I don't know about you, but for me, the effects are part of the performance. Like tonight, I might want to just bend over and fuck with the feedback on the, And
exactly.
with something like on a pre-programmed thing like the Fractal, like I would have to plan ahead, and that therefore ruins the spontaneity of the whole thing.
Right. Totally. Yep. Absolutely.
And it's all about the spontaneity. That's why we do it.
That's a fact. I just find it so odd that these places they book you into the place and you're doing a sound check and they're like, oh my God, it's too loud. And you're like, okay, well, let's do a quick recap. There's no one in here right now. Okay. Mm-hmm. When people get in here, it's going to be different. And then the other thing I find is that they, I'm sure you're the same way. It's like, if we're in a small room, don't mic anything except for the vocals and we'll be fine. But what inevitably they'll mic everything up. And then once we start playing, they start adding things in and they're like, oh, by the end, I had it all off. Well, by then, it's the sound man's part of the problem. So
I don't want to sound like we're complaining, but I complain about we sound like two, but I remember a gig with Robin, and you've played Robin. Robin's loud.
Yeah. Robin's not afraid.
Yeah. And the sound guy's like, it's a little loud. And he goes, guitar's a loud instrument.
Yeah.
And he just, of course, it's his name's in the bit more key, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I just love that comment. Yeah, guitar's a loud instrument.
Yeah. There it is.
Period. Yeah.
Absolutely. You
don't want it to be loud for the sake of loud. You want it to be, like compelling, and you need to play at a certain volume so dynamics actually are a thing. And
right.
Totally. Trust that you hired the right people to play,
Exactly. And you're always going to find somebody who's going to say, you guys were really loud.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that's kind of what we do. And I always kind of make the comparison. It's like, look, we are playing in the spirit of all the musicians we were influenced by, who I guarantee you, if they were playing in this club, would be deafening. And we're nowhere near what that would have been because we're not using 100-watt Marshalls. Okay.
Right. That's why that thing sits here as a nice, paperweight,
Exactly.
It looks great on camera.
But again, to your point, we're not complaining. However, you love to play and you're there to play music and you want to play music for people. You don't want to not have people like it. You're there so that you can do your thing for the people that want to show up and hear you do your thing. Yeah. And if people are going, oh no, you really need to rethink your entire modus operandi in order to conform to the recipe of this place in Blumenschlagen, Deutschland. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, hey, you know who you booked. So just kind of chalk this up to, we'll do our best to kind of perform to the room within the confines of what we do. And there it is. But a lot of them can't do that. They get real
uptight.
Real uptight about it.
There was a very funny thing. Like the guys who I'm touring with, the keyboard player, his name is Walter Fischbacher, and he's originally from Austria. And we've been living on in New York for 30 years. We've been playing together forever. They're moving back, he and his wife, and there's a picture of us at the 55 bar together from 2001. I'm like, wow, okay, I've known you for a long time. Yeah, I've been here for a long time. So we get to the gigs, and he's a keyboard player, plays a lot of jazz, just a monster player. And the bass player is a bit more jazzy, and I start playing. They're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I'm like, no, this isn't loud. You don't know loud. This is not loud. And I'm like, let's play my tunes. It's not a jazz gig. I'm a rock fusion-y, whatever you want to call what it is we do.
Right.
And then, so the drummer starts playing. I'm like, I guarantee you, like, I have to be with him. It's me and him. He sets the volume. You cannot play super soft when you play my music. And it was very funny. After a few gigs, they were like, oh, you're right. And I'm like, yeah, I'm right. And then a club, like one club, we were like, oh, wow, it's really loud. Then afterwards, it was one of those nice nights. He goes, I was really worried because, because you brought in an amp. And afterwards he said, I didn't have to touch anything. I didn't do anything. Yeah, I didn't have the PA on, just except when you were speaking. I didn't have anything on except for, the keyboard, and I'm like, yeah. And he goes, and you guys, like, it was never too loud. It was, and I'm like, it's called professionals.
Right.
Yeah. So it's trust that we know what we're doing. I know we sound bitchy, but it's changed though. It has changed. It used to be, you can people understood that volume was a thing.
Right. I find that, in the last 5 years where we've been touring extensively in the States, really for the first time. I mean, I've always done, certainly regional stuff for years, but most of my stuff where I was traveling all over the place was mostly clinics, band performances, but, kind of under the auspices of, if we had an anchor gig someplace, but usually when I was doing the Fender thing and we'd do full band things, they weren't really at clubs, right? So all my touring was in Europe. So that was kind of my thing. Oh, Europe's so much better for touring because they've got an infrastructure and they give you a place to stay and, the PAs are great and they feed you and so on and so forth. And then in the States, you're like, yeah, you'll get a couple anchor gigs and then it's door gigs everywhere. Well, how do you make that work, right? Well, we figured out a way to make it work, which has been great. And what I'm realizing is that most places don't give a shit how loud you are here, which is crazy. I mean, you show up to some place and you do your sound check and they're like, yeah, it's loud, but it is what it is. And you're like, yeah, thank you.
It's a rock club or, yeah, sure.
Exactly. So I've actually kind of got to the point where I prefer touring in the States. And part of it is because of that, where you're showing up and then you're playing at places that the only reason why people are coming to that club is to see you. And you play early, and that's pretty much the same thing in Europe too. Although a lot of times there'll be, municipally sponsored events, where they got some dough for a music series, and so there may be some randos showing up that don't know what's going on, and then the volume might be a problem. But over here, it's whoever's showing up is there to see you do your thing, and occasionally I'll get an email like, "Oh my God, you guys were so loud." My wife and I had to leave after a half hour. And then I'll go back and I'll look and I'm like, I can tell when I'm playing and I'm looking out at a crowd if people are holding their ears or not. You know what I mean? And if people are into it, it's going to be too loud for someone, and that's beyond my control. I can't think to myself, well, I got to completely rethink the way I do things. We have contemplated we've got this in-ear rig coming. And I don't want in-ears because I want a silent stage. I just want it for monitoring purposes and also for maybe protecting my ears a little.
Right, sure. Which I was going to say was, I never leave the house without earplugs.
Right.
I've got tinnitus. Oddly, not because of my volume. It was I remember one gig I've talked about this, where the drummer was drunk. And I'm like, dude, you just gotta stop. You gotta and he just did not stop. That was egging him on, without my drummer. And then it was from that night on, So first I just had a hearing test. The woman was like, wow, your hearing is surprisingly good. I'm like, because I wear earplugs all the time. So I was trying to explain to the guys in the band, they're like, well, why are you wearing earplugs? Then why are you that loud if you need earplugs? I'm like, that's not how this works.
Right.
Let's have a discussion. A cymbal, if he hits the cymbal the way a drummer is supposed to hit a cymbal, that's the thing of a peak that's going to cause the issue. It's not, you're trying to explain.
Totally.
Yeah. But, wear earplugs to a gig, which I do. I wear them in the subway in New York. Sometimes it just gets loud. Certain stations are really loud. And I'm like, okay, it's funny. I sound like we're complaining, but it is true in the States. Though I have noticed the volume to be less of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
but it is tough when you're playing a gig and somebody's going like this in the front, and you're like, okay, you shouldn't have been here anyway. Because
exactly.
So just one funny thing on this, there was one gig, we had a band opening up for us in this last tour, and they were fucking loud, and they said to the guys, that's loud. And they were like, yeah, you're totally right. They're like, okay, we now understand what's going on. But it's an interesting thing for professional musicians who are so beaten down over there to understand that for this music to be what this music is, it needs to be at a certain volume.
Without a doubt.
Or it ceases to be that music.
But isn't it funny, though, when you see a band, and we've all been there. I mean, I've been on stage with people where it's like, I can't escape. You know what I mean? It's it's almost threshold of pain.
Yeah.
And I think, well, I play loud, but it's never that.
Right.
And a lot of that is, if you're using 100-watt amps cranked, that's way louder than one 50-watt amp, reaching,
just the point. Yeah.
Exactly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I do.
But, what are you going to do? Anyway. So let's talk a little bit about gear, because gear is fun.
Always fun.
Now, you've got some high-end doggone amps back there. Is that the Bloomfield drive that you got there?
I have the Bloomfield drive. I got the classic reverb signature, and I got the studio signature. And Eli is my very good friend.
Yeah, he's a good man. He's a good man.
So people are like, how do you have 3 T-Rocks? I am very good friends with the owner of the company. You know what I mean?
That definitely helps.
Doesn't hurt. Man, I grew up being a Marshall guy. I went through the whole 80s, JMP 90s, 80s, 90s, JMP1, with the rack stuff. And
right.
And then, the Marshalls, I always think that people give Marshall a bad name in the sense of like, they automatically think Marshall is like 800 or 2000 or like the later sounding stuff.
Right.
And to me, Marshalls have one of the greatest clean tones.
Totally.
So that's an old super lead that I've kind of got a bit more to a bass spec. That, it just sounds amazing.
Yes.
And the T-Rocks, how it really started happening was I was working with Robin, and then I had the Marshall, which was just, it was cool, but it was a tough, 100-watt Marshall on a gig.
Yeah.
And then trying to get that to work right. And I had honestly, we're talking about volume, I hadn't played that loud in decades.
Right.
And it was so much so, bless him. I mean, I understand it, but it got to the point, I think I could say that he won't care. Like I would have to just angle myself so I was nowhere in the line of his amp, because I had to turn my own stage volume down because I was too aware of what I was playing. You know what I mean?
Sure, I know what you mean. Yep.
Yeah, I was above the mix on stage. I'm like, no, I can't do this. So the T-Rocks really came into being much more manageable, and I just love the way they sound. And like the master volumes on them are, it's just a really well-designed, beautiful sounding amp.
Now, do you find yourself using those where you'll set them just on the brink and then use pedals from there? Or do you like to do the channel switching thing?
No, I almost never channel switch. And most of the times in New York, I run it clean with pedals.
Right.
Just because, I got the master volume on my pedal board, so I can control everything at all times.
Sure, absolutely.
And then also I just like using some effects and the delay in front. And,
not dealing with the effects loop.
And effects loops are cool, but that's another cable running to the back of your amp. And
exactly. I understand it, doggone it.
I know.
I had submitted to the, when I had that signature amp with that company with my same last name, of which I just parted company with not too long ago. I love the amps.
Yeah.
And there was a while there when I was just using a cord right into the amp because I actually, the channel switching actually made sense.
Yeah.
And then I just didn't use any effect, because it had harmonic vibrato on it and it had really nice reverb. So I just plugged straight into it. And then after a period of time, it was during COVID where I started, you want a couple little, maybe a little delay here and there, a little this, that, and the next thing, and you find yourself using your overdrive. And I've always kind of said this a million times on this doggone podcast thing, but I always find that when you're recording, an amp overdriven sounds more natural than a pedal per se, but pedals feel better live. I mean, where you can just feel that incremental push when you step on that screaming shit box, and it just makes the world a better place.
Yeah.
But it's like, an overdriven amp just sounds better. It's the same thing when you got a Marshall cranked it, man. And you turn the volume down. It sounds awesome, but sometimes you crank that volume all the way up and you just want another increment. You know what I mean?
Sure, I do.
And it's the great struggle.
A lot of my stuff, there's a lot of ambient, for lack of a better word, delays and reverbs, and I just really like that sound. It's trio usually, so I try to mix up sonically what's going on. And I just find with the channel switching, and then like we talked about that 4 cable method, like I don't have the patience for it. You know what I mean? And some guys got that shit dialed in. I'm like, you never, here's the main thing. You never know what you're going to encounter. So if I'm running through a good sounding clean amp, good clean platform, then I have my pedals that I really enjoy. I've worked time-tested pedals that I love, and I have complete control over the whole thing. Is it as great as if the Marshall were cranked? Maybe not, but that's that's not going to happen.
Right.
Like that's
totally.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'd rather be happy with like, oh, it's a little loud. Okay, I'm just going to roll off my volume pedal on the board, or I'm going to turn up a little bit, the whole thing. So, but, and channel switching, like, I don't know. I've gotten away from channel switing.
There's only a few times where it feels good. And then other than that, I just go back to, although I have been, I've been using this, this Tone King Royalist, which I really, really like. And, it's got two channels, but it's kind of an interesting thing because it's like two Marshalls in one. So you got attenuators for both channels. So you have one, I set one kind of JTM 45 and I have it up around, 5 or 4-ish, and then I can set the second channel to be more like a plexi and just dime it. And you can go between those two things. It's pretty awesome. But then again, I got to deal with, if I'm using a bit of delay, then I got to have the delay way down in volume for that second channel. And then for the other channel, it's barely audible. So then I just ended up using the clean channel. But even so, I set it just on the brink of breaking up. And that seems to be working. So, as you know, it's always some damn thing, but I find that anything less than 50 watts for me with my band, I just can't do it. And I used to always love 10s, but with the way my son plays drums and Toby with the organ, I need 12s. I need that bigger speaker to just give me a little bit more oomph. And as much as I try to kind of curtail, use the attenuator every now and again to try to behave. It's like within 3 tunes, it's like, if I want to be heard, I got to fucking crank this thing. And so
it's like, for me, it's that 50 watts, 40, 50 watts. I need them because you want the overhead headroom. You want that. You got someplace to go because there's nothing. I had like a 20 watt Marshall. It sounded great until that 1 gig. I was like, I got to get rid of this thing. Like, sounds amazing. And then you play with a band. You're like, I got no place to go. I turn up. I just get more overdriven. Like this. Yeah. So I just need that extra freedom, and I've had this conversation. I'm sure you're the same with like, like for instance, like Matt Schofield, and we've talked about this a bunch. Like when other people play my guitar, they're like, oh man, this is really loud. I'm like, yeah, but I never have the volume on 10. Like I'm not, it's all interactive. Right. So if anybody sits in on my rig, they're like, chong, chong. You're like, holy shit, dude. Like, no, that's not the way. I'm like, am I playing that loud? And people are like, no, you're not playing that loud. I'm like, it's just, it's you just you learn how to do your thing. And so it's all very dynamic and, nerdy. Yeah. So
and
it is funny.
And volume knobs work. They're there for a reason.
And it's everything is from the volume knob, which is to me, you know what I mean? I love that, and nerdy stuff. Like, my friend Michael just made me this guitar, this beautiful,
beautiful.
Thing. And
like placid bluish creature.
Like placid blue. Yeah. And I got him to finally said, don't put treble bleeds on us. Don't put treble bleeds in, for me.
Right.
Because I love how when you roll back, if you have a buffer on the ground, they keep you're just rolling off that little bit, that spank on the top end, and so you have all those different things just on the guitar. So when Jeff Beck, period, you know what I mean? Like it's just everything. There was minimal pedals, and it's all just from the guitar.
Exactly correct.
So yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about just. Because it seems to be a subject that people talk about quite a bit. I mean, online, I got to be honest, as much as, and I'm sure you're the same way, we make our living in a huge way about online things.
Yeah.
I'm not one to engage in a lot of, if someone asks me a question, I'll answer it, but I do not like to get involved in brouhahas online about one thing or the other.
Yeah.
I just don't do it. I mean, even if, I just don't. I never feed the trolls. The best thing you do with a troll is just not respond at all, and they just sit there on the vine, withering away into insignificance where they belong. But
absolutely.
But the whole idea of making a living as a musician, it's you'll have people who. Had storied careers with, some kind of a famous band at some point, or maybe they did, had various different label deals back in the day. I've had label deals. I've always made more money doing it on my own. Everything I've ever done has been a result of kind of keeping control of everything myself.
Yeah.
And then, pivoting when necessary. But the whole thing has been, how do I make the music I want to play, write the music I want to release, and be able to wear a t-shirt and whatever funny hat I want to wear and do the very least to conform to what I think people want.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is that a question? I don't...
As opposed to, doing whatever has to be done to fit into the realm of what people think needs to be done in order to be popular, and then being bitter that it doesn't work out. You know what I mean? It's like, I love everything I get to do. It's fun. I figure, I'm totally grateful for just the opportunity to do anything that I can musically and make a living, because it gets to the point where you think about, as you've done it long enough and you understand how the business works, just how the world works.
Yeah.
Like, you're entitled to nothing.
Zero. I have a lot to say about. I have a lot to say about all of this.
All right,
this
excellent.
Is kind of a constant conversation with many of my friends. So I'm not in the music business. I look at it that way. Like, I make my living primarily from educational stuff. So I often see that I'm in the happiness business.
Yes.
I have a group of people who really enjoy the courses I put out and my YouTube videos, my teaching, that I connect with. And that's extremely important to me as a person and an individual, that in the realm of what the world, really what comes at the end of the day is that you have family and you have friends.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
totally.
Hopefully your health and security, all those things that are really the most important things. So I know, when you're teaching or you have somebody writes you an email, like, you had a total breakthrough for me. And, it's just something you kind of did offhand. I mean, I take that very seriously, and I feel like, okay, so what's important in life? Okay, yes, I wanted to be the big rock star. I'm going to cover guitar player. You and I are friends with some of these people.
Right.
And some of those guys are not all that happy right now.
No, indeed not.
And because the pivot never happened, or they, all these things, whatever, not the right personality, not, there's a million things. So when I got out of the music business was, same thing, in-signed bands that just kind of never went anywhere. You're touring and then suddenly, poof, just kind of went away, or that style of music just sort of, the label folded, all the things.
Sure, absolutely.
Like,
yep.
Yeah, all those things. And then you're like, oh, I better start doing something on my own, Am I without, competitive envy at times? No, of course not. You see somebody who's like, you think kicking butt, and then you talk to them and they're like, hey, how are you doing this? What are you doing?
Right,
like, how are, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, what?
Right.
So, also, I kind of came to the conclusion at one point, I like touring to an extent. Then after a while, I want to go home and hang out with my family and my dogs and my cats. You know
totally.
what I mean? Like,
yep.
I'm not a homebody necessarily, but, when I was out for like 6 weeks at a time, I was like, okay.
Right.
Okay. Then you come home with a chunk of change and then you don't have any fucking work for a while because
Right.
I was in a band. You know what I mean? I was in a band,
Right.
And so the natural progression of what happened was I have to say the real pivot point for me was getting involved with TrueFire when it first started.
Right.
Like filming videos with the air conditioner had to turn off in between takes, and Brad, the owner, laying on a couch in front of me while we're filming this video at like 7:20.
Right.
I had a full head of hair. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like we're talking 18 years ago. So, and so I just kind of embraced the technology. I started teaching on Skype and things like that as soon as it started to become viable.
Right.
And the same thing happened with TrueFire. I love the guys. There's nothing. I was like, I have to do this on my own. Like, right, I have to take ownership of everything that I do, because that's how I'm going to make the most money, and that's how I'm going to have complete control over everything that I do.
Exactly.
And, release things on a schedule. It's way more work than, but I just found that I'm happy on a certain, you're always like, you're always going to want something you don't have, I think,
Right. Yeah.
But if you, like you said, if you stop for a minute and I go, fuck, man, I get up every morning and all I got to worry about is what do I do next with the guitar?
Right. Exactly.
Like, holy shit. Like, I made this happen. I'm making this work.
Right.
You know, and is it the way you imagined when I was at Berkeley, you know, looking at Ingvan, the cover guitar player, Eric Johnson with the, you know, and then, you know, then you, as you know, you're friends with all these guys and you know, it's, you find out, well, there's a few things. This sounds, I'm 56. I think we're in the same general bracket. Yeah. Where when we first got into it, selling records was a viable thing.
Right.
Like there was a music business, you know what I mean? Like, totally. And then it all kind of changed, you know? So, so either you pivot and you figure it out or you don't, you know? I know it sounds kind of harsh, and it's funny. I'll have friends call me up like, oh, you know, man, I see that you're doing well and YouTube thing's growing and you're here all over the place. And like, so can you explain to me what you're doing? I'll explain and they're like, oh yeah, fuck that. You know, like, okay, well, I have a schedule of videos and I might have to get a video out each week. I want to put out a course each month at this point, or at least a master class. I have to plan ahead. This video is not doing well. I got to do my thumbnails. I got to make sure the title is right. Oh, this video is coder tanking. Let me try a new thumbnail. Oh, now it's going up. Now let's, you know, like there's all sorts of analytics. It's like, this is not.
Yeah. It's not for the faint of heart.
No. And I've talked to friends like, you can't do it half-assed, like the YouTube world. Like I am fortunate to have been advised by like Rick Beato, you know, like he's a friend and just kind of sitting down with me one day at dinner in New York, like, Jeff, you know, and just talking honestly about finances and, you know, like what can be done, what can be accomplished and all that. And I'm like, wow, I gotta shit or get off the pot.
Right.
And I was it sounds like name dropping, me and Grissom were walking around NAMM a few years ago before COVID. And I looked at him and he looked at me and then all the panel people were YouTubers.
Right.
You know, like not players. I mean, not you know, they're YouTubers.
Sure.
And you're like, wow, this has changed. And I said to him, like, I had that moment, clarity of like, either I commit to this or I'm going to be a dinosaur.
We interrupt this regularly scheduled gristle-infested conversation to give a special shout-out to our friends at Fishman Transducers, makers of the Greg Koch signature Fluence Gristle-Tone pickup set. Can you dig that? And our friends at Wildwood Guitars of Louisville, Colorado, bringing the heat in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. I will say that where I've... you know, I do some stuff on my YouTube channel, and I've been doing, you know, during COVID, you know, I did live streams 4 times a week. Now it's 2 times a week, but I'm on the road a lot, so I have my buddy Ryan who uploads reruns, if you will. And, you know, we're trying to build the channel up, but all my stuff that gets the most views are all on everybody else's channels, you know?
Yeah.
So, and of course, I've done the stuff for Wildwood for years. And, you know, and they've got pretty good numbers out there, but they never monetized their channel because those videos were different. It wasn't about the amount of views. It was just, are the guitars selling? So whether a video would get 1,000 views or tens of thousands of views was really irrespective of the mission. You know what I mean? So it was kind of an interesting, but at the same token, the whole reason why people know who I am is because of those Wildwood videos. And it's, you know, I had, you know, articles in Guitar Player magazine, you know, record deals, you know, on Steve Vai's this and blah, blah, blah. But all these guitar magazines, and don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for all of that stuff. Of course. But the vast majority of why people know who I am is because I did the Wildwood videos. And it's one of those,
that, and you're just an unbelievably great guitar player.
Oh, well, thank you.
Communicator.
Well, there's that.
Yes.
That, you know, that was the one thing that helped. Was to be able to talk and be, you know, and I will say this, I say this to my wife, you know, when I go to, I was at this thing at Sweetwater this past week, they were doing Guitar Fest. And to your point where you have people coming up and they say, you know, the nicest shit, like, hey, you know, this time when you showed this thing and that completely opened this up for me and da 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 da. And they talk to you like they're buddies. as opposed to fawning over someone like when they get around someone like Yngwie, where it's like very much royalty and subject. You know what I mean?
Yes.
People's whole mentality changes, and it's not good. You know, I remember I sat next to Eddie Kramer at something years ago at that Cosmo music thing up in Canada. And they would just put random people together for signings. So I'm sitting next to Eddie Kramer, and he's cool. You know, I'm talking, you know, a little bit of Hendrix stuff, but just, you know, kind of matter-of-factly, you know, not super fanish. And we sit down, and these people would come up to Eddie Kramer, and they'd have their Zeppelin records and their Hendrix records and their Kiss records. And they would start shaking, and they'd get really weird and be like, "Can you sign? No, sign it there. Sign it right here." And hey, you know, and be totally like kind of psychotic. And then they would turn to me and they'd be like, "Hey, Greg, what's going on? I really enjoy," you know what I mean? Totally normal. Like we were just buddies. And I was like, you know what? I'll take that any day of the week over some kind of weird, reverential, you know, psyops.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like it's just, I'm trying to put my thoughts in order here. Yes. And I appreciate, like, you go to NAMM. I think it was funny. I was walking the dogs in the street with my wife one day, and some guy's like, "Excuse me, are you Jeff McErlain?" And I'm like, "Yeah." You know, he's like, "Oh man, I love your stuff," and blah, 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 blah. And he was really cool. I'm like, "Oh, nice to meet you." You know, and you're like, yeah. And there wasn't weird. So my wife said, happy, you know, perfect. She's like, "Did you pay that guy to say that?"
Are we married to the same woman?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You paid that guy to say that? Because what do you know him? I'm like, no. But I agree with you entirely. It's like I mean, it's a bit weird when they act like they really know you. And you're like, whoa, I don't know you. I don't know you. Like, you know.
Right. When they like start saying, "Hey, now your daughter and your son," and you're like,
yeah.
Wait a minute.
So that's very rare that happens. But, you know, like I'm very thankful and take very seriously the whole thing. You know, I enjoy teaching. I really do. Now, you know, the difference between, say, you and I is like, you're known as a player more so than I am, because you really went full hog on that. I mean, one, because, you know, your playing speaks for itself, but you made that your priority of, you know, that, you know, and I sometimes I wonder, you know, if we get deep thoughts with Jeff McErlain, like, you know, there was a lot of fear involved, like so much failure prior to that of bands not making it. Like you're signed, or you're going to, you know, Virgin came to our gig. We were really, you know, this close, and our singer just said something really fucked up on stage, and they were like, "Okay, yeah, it's not something you really want to get involved."
Right.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like, and you're like, we get to this point that they're like, we got Jason Flom at our fucking gig, and then you go ahead and say some crazy shit.
Right.
Ruined it.
Yeah.
Like, just boom, you know, like that. And sorry, we're going to pass. Okay.
Yeah.
And so
it's crushing.
It's crushing. So the teaching thing, I thought, for me was really like, you know, this is moving. This has got legs, and I enjoy it. And, you know, a certain degree of security that I had not had the majority of my life. And look, I love the people that I meet. I mean, some of the people in the walks of life, you know, teaching, being, when I used to teach, I don't really teach privately anymore, but, you know, New York City, you meet some fascinating people. And then I worked in that movie with Robin Williams and taught guitar, and that, like, all these things that just happen through that. So these life experiences that come around are really, really amazing. And then that's, you know, people like, why do you live in New York City? Because these things happen when you live in New York City. Exactly. For all the downsides, if you use location still holds true to a large extent. Yeah.
Totally.
But so I envy, like, you know, I look at you or Oz, these guys are out there just playing all the time, and, you know, like, Oz is one of those guys that like ask me like what I do online. He's like, "Yeah, you know, fuck that." And I'm like, well, good for you, man. But, you know, like, perfect. You have clarity that that's not what you want to do.
Totally.
So I like what I do. And I got a kid who's got to go to college. You know what I mean?
Well, that's a fact. You know, I mean, it's like people have followed me around. Like this buddy of mine I grew up with, and we went to college together, and, you know, he's a musician guy, but he's a school teacher and teaches English, but gigs all the time. And he went with me to a NAMM show one time, and he was following me around. He's like, "Oh my God." He goes, "How?" Because you're going nonstop. You got to do stuff nonstop. When I'm home, I mean, again, this is not complaints, but this is just, when people think it's all Jaeger and blow and horror, you know what I mean? It's like, of course it's all those things, but no, but I mean, it's like, oh my God, I'm out of merch. I just realized I forgot to get, I got to order those hats. And, I haven't had books for a while. I got to order the books. Oh, that book is out. Okay. I got to get the Grisking pedals. If I don't have those pedals for the tour, that's like, that's a pivotal part of how we make the dough. And so you're thinking about all that stuff, let alone, oh my God, I got to restring all those guitars. And where we staying, I got to get the hotels. I got to blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Oh, and then of course I have 4 kids and a wife and want to make sure I don't, shortchange that in any way, shape or form. So there's all the things that go involved in that. So it's like, and I quit partying. It'll be 30 years this year that I do everything. Right. So, although I always think it's just me, but I never post any of that stuff online because it's like, it's supposed to be anonymous, right? It's like, I don't want to get patted on the back. It's like, hey, you used to be a total shitheel, drunk, wild man, and now you're not. So,
different life.
I guess I just said it. So I guess I'm not being anonymous.
Congratulations.
But, well, thank you. But the point is that there'd be no way I could do what I was doing if I was partying. None whatsoever.
Especially at 58.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there'd be no way I could do any of those things. So, I mean, I enjoy everything I get to do. But if people are like, well, but the other thing is people assume is like, oh, you're going on the road. It's like, well, the only reason why he's making money is because, he probably doesn't pay his kid. And it's like, no, motherfucker. It's because I pay everybody the same. Everyone gets the same as I get. But, we have a lot of merch that we sell. And I have been around long enough that even if I play on a Tuesday night in Poughkeepsie or wherever it is, enough people will come out that even if it's kind of not the greatest night attendance wise, I'll make up for it at the merch table. And the next night might be sold out. And then the night after that might be another, oh my God, there's 30 people here. You know what though? They bought $1,500 worth of merch. You know what I mean? Yeah. So between all these different things at the end of the tour, you look at your money and like, we made grown-up money. This is money that, my son and Toby, last year, it's salary money. So, of course, I got all my other things that I do on top of that because, again, we got kids, we got houses, we got cars.
Yeah.
But it's, and as I say, I don't take any of it for granted. I'm not, everything I get to do, I enjoy doing. And I realize that any one of those things could dry up like that. You know what I mean?
In a heartbeat. Yeah.
In a heartbeat. And so you just make yourself available to the next thing that comes along. And, if everything would go away and it would just be like, okay, well, I guess, we'll live on what my wife makes and I'll just kind of gig around town. Well, then so be it. Teach some lessons and be done with it, Yeah. But it's, as it's like, when you're talking about doing those videos and cutting those things up and figuring out the algorithms and then figuring out, okay, what's another way I can explain this that's going to be a new and exciting. And, oh, this guy just passed away. Now we can, this is, he was an idol of mine. Let's do a special segment on that. You kind of always got to have the antenna on. And it's not just sitting around like, well, where I'm going to gig this weekend. And, it's just as far as like not considering all those other ways of making an income, because it's because of all those different things that you're able to do the stuff you really want to do. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, this tour, like, I gotta get my CDs printed up before, because like, oh man, I don't have enough, just to start that, all those things. But I can, I have, excuse me, courses and pre-recorded YouTube videos that I'm busting my butt to get ready to put out whilst I'm on the road.
Right.
So I can, so this is not, so I'm on the road and I'm still running my business. Thank God you can, it's all online and lots of planning. But, I think it comes down to they're entrepreneurial people, who happen to play guitar. I think as I have students have dealt a lot with people in finance because you're in New York, money absolutely. That you're like, wait, what? Yeah, just come on the show with me. We'll jump on the jet. And you're like, what? Right. You know what I mean? Like just when you see that level, you're like, wow, that 1% of 1% is something I cannot even comprehend.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Anyway, one guy says like, man, big guy at a very huge finance group. And he's like, I would hire you in a second because you Like if you were into finance, if you went in that road, because you're just you pivot, you look for inroads for things. You're not looking back at stuff. Okay, that's not working anymore. So what's the next thing I got to do to keep on working? I mean, I just attribute it to coming from a Scottish Catholic upbringing where, I remember working on my uncle's sheep farm in Scotland as a kid. And, he just was like, had to go on his hike and didn't want to get out of bed. He's like, get out of bed, you bloody wee pansy, and that was politically incorrect at the moment, of course, but, in 1982, but it was just, and my family has always been that way. I come up from that upbringing of like, I had to be on my deathbed before I could stay home from school, so I just kind of look at, like you said, nobody owes me anything. And although you like it, anything, you really, man, how'd you score that gig? You're like,
don't you love that?
Oh man, you're like, well, it was so weird. I was in my basement playing guitar and somebody just happened to hear me when they walked up. You know what I mean? You're like,
exactly.
Yeah, it's a weird one. And you're like, well, I do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I commit.
I'm busting my ass here, pal. That's how it happened.
Exactly. And, and happily so. But okay, so we talk about lamenting certain things. Like I let playing go, for a really long time because the downside of sometimes my mentality would be the money would come first. I mean, I got a family, so I had to make the money come first.
Sure.
And then so you get so caught up in this thing and suddenly like, I haven't made a record in ages. Like, and I'm not even really gigging that much. What happened? So people would say like, oh, I didn't know you don't do gigs, right? Or anything. I'm like, no, and nobody called me for gigs because I just wasn't in circulation. Oh, I just thought you did your thing. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't mean I can't do your thing.
Right.
So yeah. So I'm sure you probably get this too, because we're known as the guy who does our thing.
Right.
And that's okay. So it's just interesting, and this is where I can't thank Robin enough to have just kind of said, like, let's do something together. And then it got me back into the idea of like, oh man, I really like playing the guitar in front of people the most.
Right.
That is my favorite thing to do next. I like doing the videos and teaching, but having a great gig, there's just nothing like it, And so that was cool. So maybe, and at gigs, there would be after gigs, people come up to me like, oh man, I have all your True Fire stuff. I had no idea that you could play.
Right. Yeah.
I got that a lot, And then what are you going to do when you're teaching? Show off on a video? Come on. It's not about you at that point.
But I also think a little bit of it is this compartmentalization that people have in their brains. They can't fathom that you can do many things well and that you need to do all of those things in order to put a living together. And I find this, when I'm doing gigs with the band. I mean, I'll have somebody come out and they'll be, I had your Hal Leonard books, and that's how I had this particular video back in the day, and that's how I know you. But man, I really enjoy the band. It's great. Or they might come out and, they come from all these different places, but the thing they always say is like, man, this is what you do online is no comparison to live. I mean, this is completely different. It's like, well, this is what it's always been about. Everything else I've ever done has been things I've enjoyed doing. I put my all into it, but it has all been life support so that I can do this because this is what it's always been about. I mean, and that was early on. I mean, I was always about having my own band. I found out pretty early on I was, I am a good sideman. I play well with others. It's just that I've just realized that I don't want to, I'm not a follower.
Yeah. Or when somebody says, hey, can you play the solo like the record? You're like, what?
Right, exactly.
And I had I have friends who do Broadway gigs and they go, oh, you want a trail? I'm like, oh yeah, sure. I'll check it out. And you're there one or two trails. You're like, fuck this.
Right.
I got to read that from the book. And then I might be third call because it's a very tight knit community.
Sure,
and
absolutely.
So I'm not going to be first call or second call. I'm not, I'm going to be the third guy. So I have to be up on the book.
Right.
And then I know I'm going to get the notes because I'm an improviser. I just came to that conclusion at some point. I grew up, my teeth were cut with a bunch of like downtown New York jazz guys on the road playing funky, metally, fusion-y shit. And solo sections were just when you cued your head. And suddenly you're like, wait, what? No solo? Or like, you want me to play what's on the record, or I got to learn? Like, I just have no interest.
Right. I'm with you.
When I came to that conclusion at one point, like, yeah, I just love improvised guitar. Everything that I love the most is the improvisations, the interaction for creating something.
Exactly. Totally.
Yeah. And I'm not knocking someone like, you see like, like Roger Waters. I go see him every time, as a Pink Floyd fanatic. And you're like, oh, it's a glorified cover band. And I'm not knocking the guys who got great guitar player,
Sure. But they got to play those parts.
It's even Waters said it. Like, someone like, how does it feel with David Gilmour not on stage? And she goes, well, I have him on stage every night. That guy he plays the guitar solos.
Yeah, that's not it.
And then right, and so I'm not knocking someone who's got that gig and he pays.
Sure, no, I understand what you're saying. Yeah,
and there's a challenge. But even when I've heard, this guitar player just popped out of my head. Great guitar. Oh, the guy's doing the gig. He just said, well, some nights when you're playing Comfort Numb, you're just like, yeah, I'm just kind of how can I hit that vibrato tonight? Because you just played that same solo every night,
right,
verbatim, and you have to find something creative that exists in that thing.
But don't you think that it's changed from when we were younger? Because remember when we'd be into a band and you'd get the record, and the band was a trio or maybe a four-piece, and that they overdubs things.
Sure.
And then there had to be the live version, right? Yeah. So they had to rework the song for stage, and then that became its whole other thing. And you'd always be, I prefer the live version more. And then what has seemingly happened with the advent of, legacy bands and radio kind of not embracing new music, even by those legacy bands, that they'd go out and see these bands, sometimes only featuring the original sound man. You know what I mean? And they want to hear those tunes as they were on the record. And it just totally, I have no interest in it. I want to hear. That's why I always loved the Allman Brothers, is because you knew it was going to be different every night. Yep. Whatever kind of came to mind, they were going to do. And any band that improvises. But I feel that it's become kind of a, as far as like the everyday person, like if they go out and see a show, for the most part, they're expecting that legacy act to not take liberties with their arrangements. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And that to me is just, it's a little sad.
I don't want to get caught up in, like, I think Steve Martin put it best. He called it old fogeyism.
Right.
Which I think can be rampant on the YouTubes of the people in our generation. Like,
yes. Yeah.
Look, there's still great music being made out there.
Oh, no doubt.
And people say, like, oh, there's no good music anymore. Oh, no, you're not looking hard enough. Of course there is. I mean, a little cliche at the moment, like someone like Madison Cunningham. You're like, I saw her live a few years ago, knowing my friends are like, oh, you got to come check her out. She's great. And I'm like, all right, sure. And I was, whoa, this is amazing. This is great. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And and it's not just like great guitar playing, because like we love guitar players, but my favorite stuff are the guys who play guitar in great tunes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course. So I don't want to sound like old fogey, like, that. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff out there, but I'm with you. I'm not interested in hearing a live cover situation too much, because it's not my bag, man.
Right. I mean, I understand it. I totally get it. And I understand the need.
It's not for us.
But it's just not our thing, which is fine.
Yeah, it's just not for us. And that's when people say, like, oh, don't you love them? I'm like, yeah, it's great. It's just not for me.
Exactly. And that's kind of my whole modus operandi about all of this stuff now at this point, is that, look, I don't need 1 million people into my shit. I just need enough. And as long as you have enough people into it and you get to do your thing, man, I'm happier than a pig in squalor. Because and not to get too old-fogey about it, but we know that more often than not, that impetus that took that person or group over the edge to make them more mainstream or whatever the case, most likely was bullshit. I mean, yes, it had to be good enough. And then back in the day, there seemed to be a lot of exceptional people that, was able to get past the gatekeepers. But for the most part, bullshit rules the roost.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. I mean, we see it in anything from, politics to movies to, the way the world functions. And again, it's not to be I don't get bitter about it. I'm even more grateful knowing how things actually run that I have it as good as I do. That's the way I look at it.
I'm nodding my head in agreement, which you cannot see. Yes. I'm trying to think what I was going to say there about that, but it's I think it's just when you get older, you just cut through the bullshit more. You just see bullshit more clearly, and you're not, and you're like, yeah, I got time for that.
Right.
People are excited about this or that, and I'm like, yeah, what? Like,
right.
I don't even, yeah. So how's that going to affect me? It doesn't. Same thing when you flip through like Instagram or some sort of thing, or like my Apple app news, and you're like, I have no idea who this famous actor is that they're talking about. I have no idea who they are, and I don't care.
Exactly.
Like, I don't care whatsover.
Exactly correct.
Yeah.
I got enough stuff to worry about.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it sounds like this can sound like we're complaining, but like I'm not complaining. It's been great. I'm very appreciative that the technology has provided us a way that we can or master our own destinies in that sense. Like, if you work your ass off, you keep your follow the trends, do what you got to do, you're gonna, and stick with it. And it sounds like you can do it, but it's a lot of fucking work.
Well, no doubt about it. And, but it's like one of those things where I think I posted a little thing not too long ago, which I don't usually like to post that kind of stuff, but I did it anyway. Kind of just saying, hey, I drove 7.5 hours, set up, worked the merch table, played the gig, and I loved every minute of it, because when you love what you do, it's not work. I mean, it does. I mean, there are mornings where you get up and you're like, oh my God, I'm dragging ass. But to your point, you wake up and you go in your room and you're surrounded by your guitars and you're like, I get paid to do this shit. I get to play and sit and make the music I want to do. And people want to hear it. And I have fun deconstructing it and showing them how to do it. And they're so grateful for it. It's a beautiful thing. I think, when you think back to, I remember uttering the words when I was in high school or whatever, I'm going to be rich and famous. You know what I mean? It's like that was the goal, to be rich and famous. And then you realized you were around some other people that thought the same way, but then you realized you just loved playing so much that all that other shit didn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
You're just like, well, yeah, if that happens, maybe it'll happen. And of course, you have delusions of, well, if you're really, really good, of course you're going to be rich and famous. And you realize, nope. If you have really good cheekbones and and you can maybe sing like an angel and have a look that's undeniably attractive and can play your ass off, well, then maybe you might get plucked. But if you're just someone that plays really good and writes some tunes that are off the beaten path and so on and so forth, you're going to have to work your ass off in order to make a living. And but you know what? Again, we've somehow managed to do it, which again. Yeah.
I mean, and then there's also that philosophical question of having been around some of those people at the 1% of the 1%.
Right.
Are they happier than me? No. Generally speaking, they are not.
I agree with you.
It's never enough. Things are never enough.
Right.
And they're looking to the guy who's got 50 billion as opposed to 5 billion. And you're like I was some sort of video I saw that, if you made $10,000 a day, it would take you how many years to make $2 billion? Like some sort of crazy thing. Like, in 200 years, you still wouldn't have as much money as this guy of making $10,000 a day. Right. Whatever you understand what I'm saying. So, and my wife is super grounding in this sense. When we talk about this, she's like, well, how much more, you want to make more money, but I mean, what's enough? Like, not that I'm making, you know what I'm saying? Like it's...
Sure,
living in New York City is a very different equation. Living in New York City is a very different equation of how much is enough than someplace else. Yeah. But you understand what I'm saying. It's like, at some point you're like, things are okay. Like I can take some time off. I can do a tour and I can, you know what I'm saying? Do these things. And so, I'm really grateful about it. And it's cool. So you just kind of settle in and go, I play guitar for a living. I figured it out. Still trying to figure it out, but I am super happy. And
absolutely, it's a glorious thing.
Yeah,
it's a glorious thing. It just never gets old. I mean, I wake up in the morning. I'm sure you're the same way. First thing I do is get a little coffee. And if my wife's getting ready for whatever, I'll be like, all right, I'll just pick up the guitar and just sit there and start playing until she comes down, and then we'll shoot the shit for a while. I'll just sit there and play, and it's like, this is awesome. I mean, that's my favorite thing to do. I don't know about you, but I don't have hobbies. It's like I've made this joke 1,000 times. It's like I'm not in a dart league. I don't golf. Yeah. I can't fathom golf, to be honest with you. I can't imagine dedicating 3 hours to a game. I just can't imagine. I mean, I can see it, and it's not like I haven't done it. I remember one time I went up with this old buddy of mine I grew up with, and he's like, let's go golfing. And I can't golf for shit, but I went out, and I realized, oh my God, for like 3 hours here, no one can, I don't have to take any calls. I'm not expected to be anywhere else. I'm out in nature. I was like, okay, I get it. But at the same token, 3 hours away from what I need to do is just, I can't fathom it.
Yeah. Well, this is that entrepreneur kind of driven thing. Like I talk to my friends about this. Like, I can't relax. Like you seem kind of like that guy to me too. Like the brain is always, maybe I'm just projecting, but
no, you're right.
Sunday night, Saturday night, I'll be hanging out. Maybe have dinner with my wife, and I'm like, shit, I got to get that course done. I got to get this. I got to think about I got to blah, 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 totally. Wake up in the morning, first thing you're like, whoa, all right, I got to get this done. I got to get that done. How's this video doing? Like, it's weird. But, it's funny. One time I was talking to some guy, and, you could tell he was a little edgy. I don't forget where I was at a party and we were talking about music, and he's like, well, do you have any hobbies? And I'm like it was a very dismissive thing. I said, then you don't understand what I do.
Right.
Because I don't say there's no room for other hobbies. Yeah, I like watching movies. I like reading books.
Yeah, reading books, exactly. Yeah.
But I mean, to go out and play golf like for hours, or like, what do you mean painting? Like, this is so all encompassing, whether it's, and happily so, like there's so much stuff. Yeah. Like watch you play something and be like, oh, I don't have that in my bag. And then suddenly you're off and running, and it's an hour or two later. And then you just, where did this start? Oh, I started this from something. That's a Greg play. Oh, like there was a video, you had posted something on Instagram of you playing some sort of blues on a Strat. And I was just watching your vibrato, and I'm like, fuck, what great vibrato. Like,
well, thank you.
And I'm not, but that was it. I'm like, okay. And I was like, okay, he was doing that whole Clapton sort of thing. And I find that something that I have, it's a weakness of mine. Like, you know what I mean? Like you're got those bigger hands. I think that has something to do with it too. But it was so controlled. I'm like, I know what I'm going to work on today. And then suddenly, you just start to do your own thing. But
absolutely,
it sends you down, and you're perfectly happy. And I think most of my friends, they're going to, I'm going to go out and have a smoke or something. I'm like, I'm just going to play guitar for 5 minutes. And then suddenly, like, everything sort of centers again, and you just, right? And you're like, this is the greatest gift. If I don't play guitar
for a day, I am not pleasant.
Oh man, right?
I get a little testy.
Yeah, me too.
And as testy as I get.
It could even be for like 10 minutes, right? I mean, even just to connect, But yeah, it's a real, I don't want to sound, I'm torn between being this sort of esoteric at times and being, an anti-theist as, Richard Dawkins or and this pragmatic Scotsman in me. But like, it's a real gift. Like, I can't imagine, New York. I can't imagine. It sounds really douchey, but sometimes like, what do other people do? Like when you don't have the thing, like what?
Well, absolutely.
When you talk to when somebody doesn't have a thing, like a passion, it sounds, I don't want to come off as sounding, condescending, but I'm just so grateful that.
Well, exactly. When you get to be our age and you think about other friends of ours are like retiring, and you're like, what do you mean retiring?
What does that mean?
What are you going to do? You're going to sit like, I'm going to play until I can't play anymore.
Yeah, happily. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I just find that to be, very, very fortunate. So, how do we go from gear into this? Actually, you asked that specific question. Oh, and the online haters, I get plenty of them too. And I just look at that's like the guy in the subway who's a jerk. Like, there's just jerks everywhere. Like, they just happen to be in front of a keyboard and I try not to post anything negative. What's it do? It just brings everybody down.
Exactly.
There's so much negativity in the world. Why be
totally?
It doesn't bum you out when you're flipping through threads or something and it's a nice post and then I'm an animal lover. We just rescued another cat. All this kind of stuff. And you watch something. So my feed is guitars and animals. It's just funny, So
I'm a sucker for the animal video myself.
Yeah. And then sometimes you should never do that to a cat. Blah 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 blah. And you're like, oh, it's like somebody sticking their finger in your food. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're
exactly.
This person just
Yeah. Yeah. I find. I will say that I'm sure you're the same way. I've been extraordinarily fortunate that because of the nature of what I do is not real, know-it-all-y or, kind of, testosterone-y, as they say. I don't know anybody says that. But anyway, it doesn't really invite.
Is that by Chef Boyardee?
Exactly. It's a Delicious.
Testosterone.
Exactly. Some kind of pasta dish. But I don't get too many, overt just haters. I mean, every now and again, but I used to, if it was just so outlandish, I might put something funny as a response. But now I literally just don't do anything. Because, because a lot of times I'm sure you're the same way. It's like someone will write something, you're like, is this person even real? And then, and then you'll click on their ID and you'll go over and they'll have their YouTube page will have no followers. Mm-hmm. And they've only commented on 2 things, and it's both on your channel. And you're like, boy, I wonder if I know this person.
Yeah,
or,
I know.
What's the modus operandi here? You know what I mean?
I think my favorite one I got was, "You're the worst guitar player in the world." I'm like, really? The worst.
Okay.
There's no worse.
Thank you.
There's no worse than me. Yeah. I know. It's just, I think there's a certain degree of jealousy. You know what I mean? Or there's this, they have an image of what they think it's all about or something. Or they think, it's a weird, people are angry all over. And I think, unfortunately, I think the world has become angrier.
Right.
And I think social media is a big part of that anger.
Yeah.
And I think so people would never say the things to you. Nobody would come up to you in a bar and say, you're the worst guitar player in the world. So the social norms. So I just try to concentrate on the positive. But it does bug you. The ones that bug you the most, and I've heard somebody talk about this, are the ones that kind of have a grain of truth to it. Deep down that maybe you didn't kill that thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. And then you're like, you're like, wait, why is this person living, the cliche, rent-free in my brain, And then you'll think about it all day and you're like, I don't even know this fucking guy.
Exactly.
Who is this guy, Exactly. It's like the guy, like I said, in New York that bumps into you and is like a dick. And you're like, oh, it's just a crazy person, which we come across all the time, and.
Absolutely. Crazy. Well, listen, my friend, it's been an absolute blast shooting the breeze with you, chewing the gristle, as it were. We're actually going to be out in your neck of the woods. It'd be great to see you. We're going to be, I think we're at the Iridium on November 24th. It's a Sunday.
Fuck. Okay, here's the last time we played Iridium. I was playing a gig with Matt Schofield at the Bitter End, same night.
Oh, you're kidding me.
That's why I was not at your last gig. And I will be in England teaching at the end of November for Guitar Breaks. So I once again,
one of these days we'll get it together.
Yeah, it's too bad.
We'll make it happen one of these days, doggone it.
Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure, Jeff, man.
An absolute pleasure talking with you. It was great hearing your story a little bit more and getting inside your brain. And hopefully we'll cross paths soon.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, man.
All right, my friend. Take it easy. Have a good one.
You too. Take it easy, man.
You got it. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, folks, for tuning in. Special thank you to Wildwood Guitars of Louisville, Colorado, and the mighty Fishman Transducers for making this podcast possible. If you enjoyed yourself, ladies and gentlemen, please subscribe and review so that people can get the word out that this is worth experiencing. Can you dig it? Thanks again. We'll see you soon, or you'll hear me soon.